Dear students, so today we'll start the chapter number 5 from the operating systems. It is process scheduling. So as you know, this comes under module 2. So this is the second chapter of module 2. So in module 2, the first chapter is chapter number 4, that is multi-threading, and this is the second chapter of module 2, it is process scheduling. So this is my first lecture on this chapter. These are the contents of this chapter. We start with the basic concepts of process scheduling. After that, we'll discuss process scheduling criteria. After that, scheduling algorithms, thread scheduling, and multiple processor scheduling. The objectives of this chapter are to introduce CPU scheduling, which is the basis for multi-threaded operating system, to describe various CPU scheduling algorithms, and to discuss evaluation criteria for selecting a CPU scheduling algorithm for a particular system. So let us start the discussion of CPU scheduling. We know that whenever we have a computer system, so whatever the computer systems we have today, so all are the multi-processing system. Multiprocessing in the sense the number of processes will be executing at the same time, that is simultaneously, and will be performing the different kind of activities. Means here we have that facility on the system. Means we expect that your computer system should be running all the time, and some kind of balancing should be there. Means a particular process should not be overloaded and the other processes should not sit idle. Okay, means whatever the task is there, so that task should be divided evenly and it should be distributed evenly among all the processes. So all these things we are going to discuss in this chapter. So we'll start the discussion with the CPU and IO burst cycle. Means here we know that the maximum CPU utilization is obtained through the multi-programming. So that's what I discussed. So here whenever your program is executing, your system is running, so we have the CPU and IO burst cycle. Means whenever a system is running, it will be carrying out these two things. It will be executing a CPU burst, or it will be executing an IO burst or IO wait. Okay. So this is what the process execution consists of: a cycle of CPU execution and IO wait. CPU execution means this is the actual computation. Okay, so whenever your process is executing the instructions, we call that as the CPU execution. Okay, so this is for the execution of the instruction. But we know that whenever a process is executing, so it may want to have access to a particular resource. It may be a IO resource. So in that case, we already saw this, that every device maintains a queue that is called as a device queue. Means usually at a time only one process can use a device. One process will be allowed to access a device at a time. So at that time, if any other process want to have that device, so that will be in the waiting state. Okay, so that's what here whenever a process is executing, so it will be going through these particular two steps, so either CPU execution or IO wait. Okay, so that CPU burst distribution. Here we have a graph that shows how exactly the CPU burst time is going to vary. So here on the x-axis we have the burst duration in terms of the milliseconds. In the y-axis we have the frequency, and you can see the frequency. Okay, and it depends on what task the operating your system is performing. So here this figure shows how exactly your process will go through the sequence of the CPU burst and the IO burst. So it is very clear. So whenever your process starts execution, your process execution will start from the CPU burst, where the actual computation takes place. So it may be performing or executing some instructions like load, store, add, store, read from file. So the instructions will be executed. So after some time, your process may want to access a IO device. So whenever it request for that IO device, that process will be moved to the device queue of that device. So during this period, the it will execute the IO burst, means it will be waiting for that IO. Okay, so once that IO is available, it will finish that activity and again it will come back to the program which it is executing. Okay, means it will resume the execution of that program. So again it may execute the another set of instructions. So again during this time we have the CPU burst. Okay, so here in our example it is executing store, increment, index and write to file. So after this again it may want to have access to a device. So again the same thing is carried out here, the same thing is repeated. So once again it will send a request to the device. So if that device is busy, the process will be moved to the device queue of that device. Okay, so after some time when the device is available, so the process will finish its task on that device and again it will come back to the program and again it will resume the execution. Okay, so here also again the process was waiting for the IO, so it is nothing but IO burst. Again after that when it come back and it will resume the execution, again we have the CPU burst. Okay, and after this again it may wait for a particular device, again it will be having IO burst, again after this CPU burst. So here it's a sequence of alternating sequence of the CPU burst and the IO burst. Okay, so in this way the process will be executing through these two steps, that is either CPU burst or the IO burst. So after this we'll see the CPU scheduler. So we know that whenever the number of processes are there in your system, so the CPUs, okay, so they will be waiting for the execution, because in most of the time it may not be possible for the CPU to execute all at once. So we already have discussed all these things in the previous lecture, that whenever a process is there on the system, so by default it will be present on the job queue, but after that when a process is ready for the execution, so it will be moved to the ready queue. So in the ready queue the number of process will be waiting to get access to the CPU. So CPU should get should take a particular process from the ready queue for the execution. Okay, so for that it uses a mechanism that is called as a CPU scheduling, that is CPU scheduler. So it selects among the processes in memory that are ready to execute, so this will be present in the ready queue, and allocates the CPU to one of them. So CPU scheduling decisions may take place when there are so many situations in which the CPU scheduling decision may take place. So here we have listed out some of the situations in which the CPU scheduling decision will take place. The first one is whenever a process switches from the running state to the waiting state. Okay, so presently a process is running, and when that process will move from the running state to the waiting state, so here the CPU can take up a new process for the execution. So in this case the CPU is going to take one process from the ready queue to the execution. Okay, the second one is switches from the running to the ready state. Means here what happens, the process was running, so by one or the other reason if that process will be moved to the ready queue, okay, so in that case the CPU will be available for the next process. So here also the CPU may take one process from the ready queue and it will start execution. The third possibility is it switches from the waiting to the ready. Okay, so in this case also here we know that whenever process sends a request to the device, so if the device is not available, so process will be waiting in the waiting state. Okay, so after that when the device is available, the process may have finished its execution and it will want to have the execution to be resumed. So in this case also the CPU scheduling will take place, and at the end terminates. So when the currently executing process terminates, the CPU will be available for the next process. Again it is going to take a particular process from the ready queue by using this CPU scheduling mechanism. Okay, so here we saw these things. Okay, so here whatever this 4 discussions we saw, so in all these things it is non-preemptive. So here 2 terms are very important, that is preemptive and non-preemptive. Preemptive means what? When a particular process is executing, and at that time if another process want to have the execution, but let us consider that a new process is having the highest priority and it that should be served on the urgent basis than the currently executing process. So here it is left to the CPU whether to decide whether it should stop the execution of a currently executing process and it should take the new process for the execution. So this is measured, or this is measured based on these two things, that is the preemptive and non-preemptive. Preemptive means it depend whatever the currently executing process is there, if that process is preemptive. Preemptive means it is possible for the CPU to temporarily stop the execution of that process, and it can take the higher priority process for the execution. Okay, this is called as preemptive process. If the currently executing process is non-preemptive means until the execution of that process is finished, the CPU cannot stop the execution of that process. Okay, even though any other process of highest priority is requesting the access. Okay, so these two terms are very important. So so here whatever the four scheduling decisions we saw, so these are the non-preemptive, and all others will be the preemptive here. So next term is the next component of your CPU is the dispatcher. So what exactly the dispatcher? The name itself indicates dispatcher module gives control of the CPU to the process selected by the short-term scheduler. I think in the previous video we saw about the scheduler. The two types of schedulers are there, that is short-term scheduler and long-term scheduler. The long-term, based on the long-term scheduler, is going to decide the degree of your multi-programming. Means here it is going to take up a process from the process into the job queue, whereas here short-term scheduler is also called as CPU scheduler, so it will take up a process from the ready queue. So here the dispatcher is again having the different concept here. So the dispatcher module will give a control of the CPU to the processor selected by the short-term scheduler. Means what happens here, the short-term scheduler means it is a CPU scheduler. It is going to take a process from the ready queue and it will bring that process to the CPU for execution. Okay, so after that it is the dispatcher which will give a control to that process of the CPU for the execution. Okay, so here this involves this particular activity. So first it is going to switch the context. Okay, means context switching means the switching of executing a particular process, switching of CPU from executing process to the another process. So after that it is going to switch the user mode. Okay, so after that jumping to the proper location in the user program to restart that program. Okay, so this is what the sequence that is followed by the dispatcher. Okay, so whenever a process is brought from the ready queue to the CPU for the execution by the short-term scheduler, so we know that the dispatcher will give access to the CPU to that new process. So in order to do this, first it is going to perform the context switching. Already we know what about the context switching. The context switching means the processor will switch the execution from one process to the new process. Okay, so after this, second one is switching to user mode. So when that new process execution is started, so its mode will be changed to the user mode. And the third one is whenever you want to execute that particular program, so the execution pointer should be moved to the proper location where the execution should begin. Okay, so here we have one more term, that is dispatch latency. So this is the time that it takes for the dispatcher to stop one process and start the another process. Okay, because during this time the CPU will not be doing any useful task. So that's why it is called as a latency. It is dispatch latency. So after this we have the scheduling criteria. Means here we'll discuss how exactly the CPU scheduling will work. So scheduling means here whenever the number of processes are there in the ready queue, on what basis the CPU scheduler is going to select a particular process. So here we'll discuss some of the terms which are, or the some of the things which will affect this particular decision. The first one is CPU utilization. So we expect to keep the CPU as busy as possible. Okay, because we know that the systems are multi-programming systems. So whatever the capacity of the CPU is there, so the entire capacity of that CPU should be utilized properly. The second one is throughput. The throughput indicates the number of processes that complete their execution per unit time. Okay, so throughput is the number of processes that are completed their execution in a particular time. Okay, so here again, so you want to increase the throughput. Okay, so again, in order to increase the throughput, so you have to select more number of processes from the ready queue. The third one is turnaround time. So turnaround time is the amount of time to execute a particular process. This is also called as the burst time. Okay, so every process will have a burst time that indicates how much amount of time is required to complete its execution. Okay, so the next one is waiting time. This indicates the amount of time a process has been waiting in the ready queue in order to get access to the CPU. The next one is response time. So the amount of time it takes from when a request was submitted until the first response is produced. Okay, so it is not output, it is waiting for the response. So here the time gap between when the request is sent and when the first response is got, so this is termed as the response time. So after this we'll see the scheduling algorithm optimization criteria. Means here we saw here we have discussed the different components that will affect the CPU scheduling criteria. So here we will discuss which is to be maximized and which is to be minimized. Okay, so here the first one, that is CPU utilization, this should be maximized, already we discussed. The throughput should also be maximized, this also we discussed. Okay, the turnaround time should be minimum, means the amount of time that it required for a process to complete should be minimum. So waiting time should also be minimum. Okay, so in a less time the process should be taken from the ready queue to the CPU for execution. And the next one is minimum response time. The time to get the response, the first response should also be minimum. Okay, so this is the scheduling algorithm optimization criteria. Okay, so here we saw the optimization criteria for the different aspects of for the CPU scheduling algorithms. So now we'll start the discussion of different CPU scheduling algorithms. So we'll start with the first one. So the first CPU scheduling algorithm is first come first served scheduling. So the first come first served, it is also called in short as FCFS. As the name itself indicates, first come first served. Okay, means here when the number of processes are available in the ready queue, so when the CPU want to take up a process from that ready queue, so it will check whether it will check for a process which has arrived first in the ready queue. Okay, so that is first come first served. A process that enters the ready queue first will be taken for the execution first. Okay, so in order to illustrate this scheduling algorithm, here we have taken one example. Okay, so here in our example, so presently the ready queue is having three processes, that is process P1, P2 and P3. So we have also given with the burst time of every process. So process P1 is having burst time of 24, process P2 have the burst time of 3, process P3 have the burst time of 3 milliseconds. So here let us assume that the processes arrive in this order, that is first P1 arrives, after that P2 arrives and after that P3 arrives. So in order to show how exactly the processes will be scheduled or how exactly the process will be taken from the ready queue for the execution, so we have a Gantt chart here. So this Gantt chart will show you how exactly the processes will be taken from the ready queue for the execution. So here it is very clear and very simple also, that the first come first served. So here we know that the P1 have arrived first, after that P2 and after that P3. So in the same order the processes will be scheduled. So first P1 will be taken for execution. Okay, so here the time starts from 0. So the P1, the burst time is 24. So for 24 milliseconds the P1 will be allowed for the execution. So from time 0 to time 24 the P1 will execute. During this time P2 and P3 will be waiting. Okay, so after 24 millisecond P1 will complete its execution. Okay, so after that the next process arrived is P2. So the P2 will be given the CPU for execution. So the P2 it requires 3 milliseconds for the execution. So that's why from time 24 till time 27 the P2 will be allowed to execute. So after the completion of P2 the P3 will start execution. So at 27 P3 will start execution because P3 have arrived after P2. So P3 also takes 3 milliseconds for the execution. So from 27 to 30 the P3 will execute. Okay, so in this way the first come first served scheduling algorithm will work. So here we'll try to find out the waiting time and average waiting time. So waiting time for P1 is what? So P1 is not waiting at all here. So immediately whenever it enters the ready queue, it is taken for the execution. So that's why the waiting time for P1 is 0. Okay. So here if you have the Gantt chart, the waiting time identification is very simple. So you can see the time at which that particular process have started. So for P2, so P2 has started the execution after waiting for 24 milliseconds. Okay, because for 24 milliseconds P1 was waiting, P1 was executing. So that's why the waiting time for P2 is 24. Similarly, P3 was waiting in the ready queue for 27 milliseconds. Okay, so the waiting time for P3 is 27. So if you take the average, so the average waiting time will become 17 here. Okay, so this is about first come first served based scheduling algorithm. So we'll take one more variation of this example. So in the previous discussion we considered that the processes will arrive in the order P1, P2, P3. But let us consider the processes will arrive in the order P2, P3 and P1. Okay. So here in FCFS we know that the order of arrival is very important. So again here the P2 have arrived first means the P2 will be allocated the CPU first, and we know that the bus time of P2 is 3. So from 0 to 3 P2 will execute. So after P2 P3 will arrive. So P3 will be allowed for the execution. So it also requires 3 milliseconds. So that's why from 3 to 6 the P3 will execute. So after that the next process is P1. So again P1 will be allowed to execute. So from 6 to 30 the P1 will execute because the bus time of P1 is 24 milliseconds. So here the waiting time of P1 is 6 milliseconds because so here the P1 was waiting until P2 and P3 finished their execution. Okay. So similarly for a bus time for waiting time for P2 is 0 because immediately P2 starts execution, and waiting time for P3 is 3. Okay. So here if you calculate the average waiting time, so it comes out to be 3, which is very less compared to the previous waiting time. Okay, so that's why again it depends on the order of arrival. Okay, and based on this we have the better waiting time. Okay, here. So here it is much better than the previous case. So this is called as the convey effect, short process behind the long process. So this is non-preemptive algorithm. So the convey effect means what? When we have a short process behind the long process, so that although the execution time is very short, it should unnecessarily wait until that long process will complete the execution. So this is called as a convey effect. So here the FCFS scheduling algorithm is a non-preemptive scheduling algorithm. Non-preemptive in the sense, whenever a process starts execution, until that process completes the execution, no other process will be allowed for the execution. So this is about the first scheduling algorithm, that is first come first served. So next we'll see the second scheduling algorithm, that is shortest job first scheduling algorithm. So the shortest job first is also called as the SJF algorithm in short. As the name itself indicates, the shortest job first means when we have the number of processes waiting in the ready queue, so the CPU will take a process which is having the shortest burst cycle or shortest burst CPU burst time. Okay, so it associates with each process the length of its CPU burst. Use these lengths to schedule the process with the shortest time. So SJF is optimal, so gives minimum average waiting time for a given set of processes. So the difficulty is knowing the length of the next CPU request. So that we'll see later. So before that we'll consider one simple example to understand this SJF also. So as I told you, SJF means shortest job first. Okay, so the process which is having the shortest burst, that will be taken up first for the execution here, regardless of the arrival time. Okay, so here in our example we have the 4 processes P1, P2, P3, P4, and the burst time is also given. Okay, so it is 6, 8, 7, 3 respectively. So the possible Gantt chart for this SJF scheduling here for this example is, so here when the CPU starts execution, if you are using this SJF, so first it will compare the burst time and it will select a process which is having the lowest burst time. So out of the 6, 8, 7, 3, the lowest burst time is 3. This is for process P4. So that's why first P4 will be allowed for the execution. So the burst time is 3. So it will execute from timeline 0 to timeline 3. Okay. So once P4 completes the execution, So among the remaining 3, we have to select the process which is having the lowest burst time. So among these 3, that is P1, P2, P3, 6 is the minimum. So it will take up P1. Okay. So again P1 will be allowed for the execution. The burst time is 6. So from timeline 3 till timeline 9, the P1 will execute. Okay. At timeline 9, the P1 will finish its execution. So P1 and P4 have finished the execution. The remaining 2 processes are P2 and P3. So here out of P2 and P3, P3 is having less burst time, that is 7. So the P3 will be allowed for the execution after P1. So after P1, P3 starts execution from timeline 9. So P3 requires 7 milliseconds. So from 9 to timeline 16, the P3 will execute. So after that, the remaining is P2. So P2 will be allowed for execution for 8 milliseconds, that is from timeline 16 to timeline 24. So in this way, the shortest job first scheduling algorithm will work. Okay. So here if you calculate the average waiting time. Okay. So the waiting time for P1 is 3. Okay. Waiting time for P2 is 16. Waiting time of P3 is 9. And waiting point for P4 is 0. If you take the average, it will become 7 here. Okay. So this is, in this way, the shortest job first scheduling algorithm will work. So as we saw here, although this HF is optimal, the difficulty is knowing the length of this next CPU request. Means here, if you know the CPU burst time of every process, it is very easy to take a particular process for the execution. But if you want to determine, it is little bit difficult. So that's why here there is one formula which can be used for determining the length of the next CPU burst. Okay. So here the formula is tau of n plus 1 equal to alpha Tn plus 1 minus alpha into tau of n, where Tn indicates the actual length of nth CPU burst. Okay, if you know the nth CPU burst, you can predict the n plus 1th process CPU burst. Okay, so tau of n plus 1 is the predicted value for the next CPU burst. So here alpha is value which is between 0 to 1, and this will indicate the influence of the old value. Okay. So here based on the alpha, we have again the 3 possible things. So if alpha is equal to 0, tau of n plus 1 equal to tau of n, means the next CPU burst is exactly equal to the previous CPU burst. Okay. So if alpha is equal to 1, so we have tau of n plus 1 equal to alpha tau of m. Okay. So here only the actual last CPU burst counts here. So here if we expand the formula, so tau of n plus 1, it will be expanded in this way. Okay. So since both alpha and 1 minus alpha are less than or equal to 1, so each successive term has less weight than its predecessor. Okay. So again the influence of the previous one and the next one is decided based on the value of alpha here. Okay. So here we have one more variant of the shortest job first scheduling algorithm. So by default, the shortest job first scheduling algorithm is a non-preemptive scheduling algorithm. So we have a variety of preemptive scheduling algorithm. So that is called as SRTF, that is shortest remaining time first scheduling algorithm. Okay, so it's a variation of the shortest job first scheduling algorithm where we have the preemptive version. So here, as the name itself indicates, shortest remaining time first scheduling algorithm means, so here also the arrival time is very important. Okay, so based on the arrival time, so you will be having the execution of the different processes, and each time you have to check the remaining time, the remaining execution time of every process, and you have to select a process which is having the shortest remaining time. Okay, so without wasting much of the time, we'll directly discuss the example here. So here in order to demonstrate the shortest remaining time for scheduling algorithm, so we have the example here. So as I told you, for this algorithm you need to have the arrival time also. So we have the 4 processes here, P1, P2, P3, P4. The arrival time is also given. So P1 arrives at 0 time, P2 arrives at 1, P3 at 2, P4 at 3 milliseconds. So the burst time is also given for all the processes, that is 8, 4, 9, 5 respectively. So here we know that arrival time is at arrival time 0, only process P1 will be available. Okay, so that's why at the beginning, means at arrival time 0, P1 is available. So only one process is available, so nothing to compare the burst time. So that's why by default P1 will be allowed for the execution. Okay, so P1 will be allowed for the execution, so it will be executed for 1 millisecond. So after 1 millisecond, okay, so the P2 will also arrive. So now in the ready queue we have two processes, P1 and P2. Okay, and here the algorithm is shortest remaining time for scheduling algorithm. Means here each time you have to check the remaining execution time of every process, and you have to select a process which is having the remaining execution time, which is smallest remaining execution time. Okay, so at time 1 the P2 have also arrived in the ready queue. So in the ready queue we have the two processes, okay, P1 and P2. So P1, it has already executed 1 millisecond out of 8, so the remaining time is 7 here. Okay, so the remaining time of P1 is 7 and the remaining time of P2 is 4. So out of 7 and 4, 4 is minimum, so that's why now P2 should be given access for the execution. Okay, so here you can see in the Gantt chart, P1 will be executing for 1 millisecond. After 1 millisecond the P2 will start execution. Okay, so when P2 starts execution, again it will be allowed for execution for 1 millisecond. So after 1 millisecond means at time 2 the P3 will also arrive. Okay, so here again you have to compare the remaining time of all the processes. So P3's remaining time is 9, P2's remaining time is out of 4, 1 millisecond it has executed, so the remaining time is 3 here, and P1's remaining time is 7. So out of 7, 3 and 9, 3 is minimum, so that's why P2 will be continued for the execution. So P2 will execute for another 1 millisecond. Okay, so after that at time 3 the P4 will also arrive at the ready queue. Now we have 4 processes in the ready queue. Again you have to compare the remaining execution time. So we know that the remaining execution time of P1 is 7, the remaining execution time of P2 will be, so out of 4, 2 millisecond it has executed, so the remaining time is 2 here. P3's remaining time is 9 and P4's remaining time is 5. So the smallest remaining time is 2, which is for P2, so that's why P2 will be allowed for the execution for the 4 millisecond, which is the burst time of that process. Okay, so here the P2 will execute for 4 milliseconds, so at timeline 5 P2 will complete the execution. Okay, so now P2 has completed its execution. Now you have to take up the next process for the execution, because all the processes have arrived in the ready queue. So except P2, again you have to compare the remaining time of all the processes. So we know that P1 has already executed for 1 millisecond, so the remaining time of P1 is 7, remaining time of P3 is 9, remaining time of P4 is 5. So out of this 7, 9 and 5, the 5 is smallest, so P4 will be scheduled for the execution next. So after P2, the P4 is going to execute, so the execution time of P4 is 5, so it will be allowed to execute for 5 milliseconds. So from timeline 5 to timeline 10, P4 will execute. So now P4 have also completed the execution, so the remaining processes are P1 and P3. So the remaining time of P1 is 7, remaining time of P3 is 9. So out of 7 and 9, 7 is smallest, so P1 will be taken for the execution. So P1 starts its execution at timeline 10 and it will execute for 7 milliseconds. So from 10 to 17, P1 will execute. So once the P1 completes, the only remaining process in the ready queue is P3. So now the P3 will be allowed for execution. So its burst time is 9. So for 9 milliseconds, the P3 will execute from timeline 17 to the 26. So in this way, the scheduling takes place in case of the shortest remaining time for scheduling algorithm. Okay. So here in this example, so let us calculate the waiting time and turnaround time. So the waiting time here for process P1, the waiting time is, here it was waiting for the 10 milliseconds. So 10 minus 1, it is 9. Okay. So after that, for process P2, the waiting time is 0. For process P3, the waiting time is 15, and process P4 it is 2. So around if you calculate the average waiting time, it comes out to be 6.5 millisecond. In the same way, the turnaround time, okay, so for P1 the turnaround time is 17, for P2 the turnaround time is 5, for actually it should be, you have to change this. Okay, so I'll just tell you the actual value. For P1 the turnaround time will be 17, for P2 the turnaround time is 5, for P3 the turnaround time is 26, and for P4 the turnaround time is 10. So if you just sum and divide by 4, you will get the actual turnaround time. Actually there is some mistake in these values. Okay, you have to just correct these things. So in this way, the shortest job for scheduling algorithm will work. So next we'll see the third CPU scheduling algorithm, that is priority scheduling algorithm. So here the name itself indicates the priority scheduling algorithm means every process will come with the priority. So whenever we have the number of processes that are waiting in the ready queue, the CPU will select a process which is having the highest priority. Okay. So here a priority number will be associated with each process. The CPU is allocated to the process with the highest priority. Okay. So here we have the convention that the smallest number will indicate the highest priority. Again, we have the two versions of this priority scheduling. You may have the preemptive version or the non-preemptive version. So here the SJF is a priority scheduling where the priority is the predicted next CPU burst time. So you can consider in this way. So here the priority scheduling may have the problem of starvation. So starvation means the low priority process will continuously wait, because we know that each time only higher priority process will be taken for the CPU. So during the execution again let us consider some more processes will arrive the ready queue which is having the highest priority. So here if you go on this way, so only the highest priority processes will be executing and lowest priority will continuously wait. So this situation is called as starvation. So again there are so many methods to solve this. So the one of the possible solution for this is aging. Aging means what happens, so after some time the progressively you can change or you can increase the priority of the lowest priority processes. Okay, means here what it does is, so whenever a particular process completes the execution, the lowest priority process's priority will be increased by 1. So after that again next process will be taken for the execution. After its completion again the lowest priority process priority will be increased. Okay, so gradually you will be increasing the priority of the lowest priority process. So after some time that lowest priority process will become the highest priority process and that will also get the CPU for the execution. So in this way the problem of starvation can be overcome. Okay, so now we'll consider a simple example to understand how exactly this priority scheduling algorithm will work. So here for our example we have taken the 5 processes P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. The burst time of this process is given, that is 10, 1, 2, 1, 5, and the priority of this process is also given. So P1 is having priority 3, P2 is having priority 1, P3 is having priority 4, P4 is having priority 5, and P5 is having priority 2. Okay, so here we know that this is priority based scheduling algorithm. So we have not considered the arrival time, means we consider all the 5 processes are present on the ready queue. So here the CPU should select a process which is having the highest priority. So you have to compare the priorities. So the process which is having highest priority is the priority value 1. So the process is P2. So here the Gantt chart is as follows. So initially the P2 will be allocated because it's having the highest priority number is 1. So it is having burst time 1. So it will execute only for 1 millisecond from 0 to 1. So next to this P2, the highest priority process is P5 because the priority number is 2. So P5 will be allocated the CPU for the execution. So its burst time is 5. So for 5 milliseconds, that is from timeline 1 to 6, P5 will execute. So after this, the next priority, highest priority process is P1. The priority number is 3. So P1 will be allowed. So its burst time is 10. So from timeline 6 to 16, the P1 will execute. Okay. So after this P1, the next highest process is P3 because the priority number is 4 for P3. So P3 will execute here. So P3, its burst time is 2. So that's why it will execute from 16 to 18. So after that, the remaining process is P4. So P4 will execute for 1 millisecond. So from 18 to 19, the P4 will execute. So if you calculate the average waiting time here, it comes out to be 8.2. So this is about priority based scheduling. So after this, the next CPU scheduling algorithm we have is the round robin scheduling algorithm. So as the name itself indicates, round robin means here you will be deciding a particular time quantum. So every process will be allowed to execute for that duration. Okay. So here each process gets a small unit of CPU time. It is time quantum. So it usually ranges from 10 to 100 milliseconds. After this time has elapsed, the process is preempted and added to the end of the ready queue. So if there are n processes in the ready queue and the time quantum is q, then each process gets an equal amount for time for the execution, that is 1 by n. Okay, so here by this no process waits for more than n minus 1 into q time units. So as I told you here, for the right round robin, so you will be having a time quantum that indicates the amount of time every process will be allowed for the execution. So continue sequentially, one by after the other, the processes will be allowed to execute for only that amount of time. Okay, so here we consider this example in order to understand this round robin scheduling algorithm. So here the time quantum is 4 milliseconds. So in our example we have three processes, P1, P2, P3. The burst time of these is 24, 3 and 3. So the time quantum is 4. So here let us consider all the processes are already present on the ready queue, P1, P2, P3. So the possible Gantt chart for this is, so initially it starts execution of P1. So P1 will be executed for 4 milliseconds because the time quantum is 4. So P1 will execute from 0 to 4. So after this it will take up for P2. So P2 will also be started given the CPU. So here the P2's burst time is 3, which is less than 4. So although the time quantum is 4, the P2 requires only 3 milliseconds for execution. So that's why the P2 will execute from 4 to 7. Okay, so at 7 P2 will complete the execution. So after that P3 is taken. So P3 is also having 3 milliseconds for execution. So P3 will execute from 7 to 10. So after this we don't have any next process, so it will come back to the previous process, that is P1. So again P1 will be allowed for execution. So out of 24, 4 milliseconds it has already executed, so remaining time is 20. So out of this 20 again it will execute for 4 milliseconds, so remaining time is 16. Okay, so after this P2 and P3 they have already completed the execution, the remaining time is 0 for P2 and P3. So that's why again after this, so P1 will be allocated allowed for executing execution until it completes the total burst time in terms of 4 milliseconds. So this is the possible Gantt chart for this. So typically the higher average turnaround time than the SJF, but we have the better response if you compare the round robin with the SJF scheduling algorithm. So here we'll just discuss about the time quantum and the context switch time. So you consider the first scenario where the process time is 10, means the burst time is 10. So here the quantum is 12. So we don't have any context switch because the process time is 10, it will be allowed to execute for 10 milliseconds. In the second case, let us consider the time quantum is 6. Okay, so here the process will be allowed to execute only for 6 milliseconds. After that again it should be rescheduled. So here we have one context switch. Similarly, if the time quantum is 1 and if the process time is 10, so the 9 times the context switching will take place. Okay, so this is the relation between time quantum and the context switch. So the next one we have the multi-level queue scheduling algorithm. We know that whatever the ready queue is there, so the ready queue we have the number of processes that are waiting for the execution. So here in multi-level queue scheduling, what happens, whatever the ready queue is there, that ready queue itself is partitioned into the two separate queues. So we consider one group of processes that are foreground processes, another one as the background process. So the foreground is nothing but the interactive processes and background processes are the batch processes. So again it depends on the situation. So the foreground processes, some separate scheduling algorithm will be used. The background process also some separate algorithm may be used. So in our example here let us consider the round robin scheduling algorithm used for foreground processes and the FCFS scheduling algorithm used for the background processes. So as the name itself indicates, multi-level queue scheduling means the ready queue itself is divided into the so many queues. So here in this figure you can see this very clearly. So we have the number of queues here. So we have a set of processes which are similar to each other. So here the student processes are in this queue, batch processes are stored in this queue, interactive editing processes are stored in this queue, interactive processes are stored in this queue, and system processes are stored in this queue. So here every queue is having the priority. So you can see the priority will increase as we go from the lowest level to the highest level. Means here we know that first the system processes will be allowed to execute, after that these processes will be allowed to execute, after that this, and so on. Okay, so this is about the multi-level queue scheduling. But here what happens is whenever a process enters a queue, so during the execution it will be continued to reside in that queue only. It cannot change the queue. So that's why in order to provide this facility, that is in order to provide an option to for a process to change from one queue to the another queue, we have one more variation of this, that is multi-level feedback queue. Okay, so in this multi-level feedback queue, a process can move between the various queues. Okay, because here in order to avoid the aging, this option is given. Okay, so here again we have considered one example. So before that we'll see this, that is in multi-level feedback queue scheduler is defined by the following parameters. So again some parameters are used for define in order to decide whether a process should be moved from one queue to the another queue. That is, it depends on the number of queues, the scheduling algorithms for each queue, method used to determine who to upgrade a process, when to upgrade a process, method used to determine when to demote a process, method used to determine which queue a process will enter when that queue needs service. So here we have considered an example again to understand how exactly this multi-level feedback queue will work. So we have taken three queues here, the Q0, Q1, Q2. Q0 uses round robin with time quantum of 8 milliseconds. Q1 we have round robin with a time quantum of 16 milliseconds, and Q2 uses the FCFS scheduling. So here we know that whenever a new job enters, so the first queue is Q0, so it enters Q0. Okay, so here it will be allowed to execute for 8 milliseconds. So in that period, if it not complete the execution, it will be moved to the next queue, that is Q1, so where it will be allowed to execute for 16 milliseconds. So here also, if it will not complete the execution, it will be moved to up Q2, so where it executes based on FCFS. The same thing is shown in this particular figure. Okay, so this is about the different CPU scheduling algorithms. So with this I stop here, and the remaining portion will discuss in my next video lecture. Thank you.